Thank you, everyone. We will start the second panel discussion on the Arctic governance. If you all please be seated. We'd like to get in touch with Mr. Romain Chuffart, who will moderate the second panel. Mr. Chuffart, are you online? Are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Mr. Chuffart. The floor is yours.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this second panel on revisiting Arctic governance. In this panel, we are lucky to have 6 wonderful speakers with us today. Thomas Winkler, Arctic Ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark and Head of Department of Arctic and North America at the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Rebecca Lynge, Greenland representative to the Arctic Council from the Government of Greenland's Department of Foreign Affairs. Margretha Jacobsen, Senior Arctic Official of the Faroe Islands in the Arctic Council. Heidi Kutz, Canada's Senior Arctic Official and Director General for Arctic, Eurasian and European Affairs at Global Affairs Canada. Louis Krishak, Senior Arctic Official at the US State Department. And hopefully a bit later today, Dr. Dali Sambo-Daro, Chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. As the Arctic Council turned 25 in September earlier this year, we thought this panel could be a good venue to reflect on the evolution of Arctic governance over the last 25 years. I've asked each panelist to reflect on the overall evolution of Arctic governance in their first 4-minute remark. Then once each panelist has had a chance to speak, we'll have another 4-minute remark for our panelists to reflect even further on the challenges that lie ahead for governance in the region. In the remaining time, hopefully, we'll have time to open the floor to questions from the audience. Thomas, let's start with you. In your view, how has Arctic governance evolved since 1996, and how has Denmark's position in Arctic governance changed since the creation of the Arctic Council?
Well, thank you, Romain, and thank you for inviting me to speak once again on Arctic governance. That's always a pleasure. I think, as many of my colleagues, I'm still a bit hit by jet lag and other things after a successful SAO meeting in Salakhat in Russia last week. But the short answer to your first question, I mean, how has governance evolved in the Arctic since 1996? Well, I mean, the short answer is significantly, or perhaps even dramatically. But of course, I've also thought about how to answer such a question. 1996 is a long time away. I think the key point, regardless of where you pinpoint in history, that the Arctic states and others involved have evolved our cooperation, including on governance. Let's say, as the Arctic, as the situation in the region has evolved. We all know how dramatically that has been with climate change, but I would strongly believe that we as Arctic states and others have also evolved our governance. I've decided to make three brief points in history when you look back from 96. I mean, of course, for the Kingdom of Denmark, the Ilulissat Declaration from May 2008 was an important step in regards to the governance of the Arctic. The Arctic was suddenly really getting on the international agenda, and in this case, the coastal states of the Arctic Ocean responded with the Ilulissat Declaration, and perhaps even more significant, by their actions afterwards. The second point in history, and I know others would choose other points, but I would choose the Reykjavik Ministerial in May of this year. I think that was a very, very clear signal, after a little bit of turmoil in the years gone by, that the Arctic Council and the Arctic governance is back on track with a very, very strong and ambitious declaration, and with the first strategy of the Arctic Council. And then I will, and I know it's a bit brief, but I would point to the meeting we had in Salakhat last week, where the senior Arctic officials and the permanent participants met physically for the first time in a couple of years. And to me, what we did in Salakhat only underlined that we are still ready to manage the Arctic responsibly, Now under a Russian chairmanship, a very well-functioning Russian chairmanship, we're still ready, all of us, to move forward together in order to promote the positive development in the Arctic. So that would be my very brief answer to your first question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. And now from Denmark to Greenland. What about you, Rebecca? How do you think Arctic governance and Greenland's position within Arctic governance has changed over the last 25 years?
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. And if you can't, I'm sure someone will stop me so that I just don't continue blabbing on. Firstly, thank you for having me. And a lot has already been said in the first keynotes we heard this morning or earlier today, and in the first panel as well. And I can echo definitely what Thomas has just mentioned as well. So I'll try not to repeat those points, but still give you a bit of a Greenland perspective on things. I mean, when we look over the course of the past 25 years, as Thomas also said, the Arctic has undergone great changes. The region has developed from a situation of comparative isolation and relative inaccessibility to becoming increasingly part of global geopolitical, trading, and regulatory networks, and subject to multiplying claims on its resources. So with these conditions in the Arctic evolving, driven by factors as climate change, as we heard, economics, geopolitics, our region's governance mechanisms have also evolved to mitigate new risks and challenges. So with the increased need for collaboration and dialogue, the Arctic Council naturally in the past 25 years has increased its role and importance. And as we see, it will increase even further. Arctic cooperation today encompasses all aspects of life and activity in the region, and we see the Arctic Council as only strengthening its role and cooperation as the main Arctic governance forum in the future. It was also mentioned by the panel before us, you know, since its inception, the Arctic Council has advanced numerous agreements on a variety of issues. Increasingly, these agreements have resulted in formal treaties signed by the Arctic, and in some cases, non-Arctic states, including treaties related to search and rescue, oil pollution preparedness and response, scientific research, and the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, lastly in 2018. If I were to pinpoint part of what we find the unique and important design of the Arctic Council is that the Arctic Council, for one, has the active participation of the indigenous permanent participants, and secondly, permits non-Arctic states and non-state actors to participate as observers, and in that role contribute to the work of the Council. And I find that, you know, when we look ahead, if we are to do that too, it wasn't part of the question, but I'll allow myself to do it. A continued inclusive approach with attention to the human dimension, as the Canadian ambassador to the EU mentioned earlier today. The human dimension is pivotal for the Arctic Council, and our common goal of a stronger Arctic Council that remains the most important body for promoting a collaborative agenda and coordinating joint action on these vital issues and the needs of the region. So I think I'll stop there, and I'm sure we'll have time to get more into things.
Thank you, Rebecca. Was a good summary of Greenland's position there. And now, again, from Greenland to the Faroe Islands, same question to you, Margretha. How would you describe the evolution of Arctic governance since 1996?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the invitation, and also good afternoon to you all here from the Faroe Islands. Good to be here. I will actually echo some of the things that both Thomas and Rebecca have said. There seems to be agreement and the same understanding of the course of events. I would say that Arctic governance has come a long way since 1996. The governance structures in place today have evolved immensely and steadily and in the right direction. And also, as has been mentioned, it is the climate change and the apparent effects of threats and opportunities that have followed that and coupled with the increased interest and engagement from a global community in the Arctic that has spurred it all. It has by and large been a smooth and pleasant involvement, although there have been times of worry and also in recent years, but it appears that we have weathered the storms and have governance instruments in place today that provide for stability and direction in cooperation. And it is reasonable to argue that today's Arctic governance is strong and visible and firmly established with the Arctic states, with whom the primary responsibility lies. And we see that the Arctic is by no means a lawless area. It is, on the contrary, subject to international law, and there is agreement on that UNCLOS is the foundation of cooperation. So today, we can say that the Arctic has evolved into a rules-based region and also recently committed to an ambitious strategy and to a vision of peace and sustainable prosperity for the people of the Arctic region. There are a number of milestones that I also would like to mention and that are worth mentioning if the involvement of governance in the Arctic region is to be accounted for properly. And the establishment of the Arctic Council is a major one and marks a new era in Arctic governance as an alternative to the one that relies or is with states primarily. And you can say another milestone and instrument of governance that cannot be overlooked is as Thomas also mentioned, is the Ilulissat Agreement in 2008, and also the 3 binding agreements on search and rescue, oil spill, and Arctic scientific cooperation that were negotiated under the auspices of the Arctic Council, and which cemented the status of the Council as a viable governance player. These preceded yet another landmark contribution to Arctic governance when the agreement to prevent unregulated high seas fisheries in the Central Arctic Ocean of 2018 came into being. And this agreement was a major accomplishment and spearheaded by the US and demonstrated good ocean governance at its best. And it also exemplified the importance of caution and the science-based approach that now underpins the line of thought of good governance in the Arctic Council. And we recall here in the Faroe Islands with pride that the Faroe Islands had the honor to host negotiations during the final rounds. And in addition here to governance in the region is paying due attention to all international conventions of relevance in an Arctic context, as they have found their way into the governance papers and the newly adopted Arctic strategy by the Arctic Council. That is to come into play as a central governance instrument in the years to come. So all in all, we could say that a rapidly changing region with alarming challenges calls for strong governance, and the changes in the Arctic having international repercussions makes the inclusive approach vital. And strengthening the Arctic Council as a governance body is and has been an overarching priority in many chairmanship programs for many years, and in so doing, it has taken due consideration to the issue of inclusion. The final thing that I would like to mention is that the last chairmanship, Iceland, set up a structured dialogue with the observers of the Arctic Council on the very issue of governance, and hereby paved the way for all kinds of actors to become involved in this particular issue of great importance. And there is widespread consensus that this initiative should be repeated. We've come a long way. That said, the current state of affairs leaves much to be desired, really. And but all in all, there's plenty of reasons to celebrate the 25 years of collaboration. And with the strategy we have set, the direction for an equally ambitious governance of the region that it has sported so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Margretha. Yes, plenty to celebrate in international law. Providing the foundation of Arctic cooperation and good governance. Exactly. So now let's turn to Canada. Heidi, the floor is yours.
My mic is set up a little bit differently here. A warm good morning, bonjour from Ottawa, Canada. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I am speaking to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. There's probably a high risk that I will repeat some of the lines, not only of colleagues on this particular panel, but I appreciate that our ambassador to the European Union spoke earlier today. Nonetheless, I think some of these points bear a little bit of repetition by their importance. So, of course, the Arctic has a long history of being a peaceful and stable region grounded in international agreed rules, norms, and international cooperation. The Arctic Council, of course, being the preeminent forum for cooperation on Arctic issues. Canada was pleased to have played a role in the creation of the Arctic Council 25 years ago, and I can't speak to that creation without mentioning the important contributions and leadership of Mary Simon, who served as our first chair of the senior Arctic officials in 1996 and currently serves the important role of Canada's Governor General. Of course, the two-pronged mandate of the Council, environmental protection and sustainable development, continues to be a relevant guidepost for the work undertaken by the Council and its 6 working groups. I absolutely agree with Rebecca's comments that the form of the Council in and of itself is central to its governance. Its inclusion of the Arctic states and 6 international Indigenous organizations that represent Indigenous peoples living in the Arctic. And I would also mention the important role that and contributions made by observers. This is the Arctic Council strategic is so important, plan is so important that I carry it around with me regularly. I always pay due credit to those who held the pen, the support, and the intellectual effort that went into that 10-year plan, because that really is a forward-leading piece that puts out markers for our collaboration forward in a very focused and also transparent way. When I think about the governance of Arctic governance, I sort of reflect a little bit of the Arctic Council and sort of the constellation that exists out there today within the Council that many have spoken about, but I think also beyond. I'd say in the first place, I'd refer to not just the Arctic Council, but also the Arctic Council's role in the establishment of a number of organizations in their own right, including the University of the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, and the Arctic Economic Council, that sit out there as important parts of and ways for different actors and stakeholders to contribute to Arctic matters. Second, I'd say the Council has really used its substantial convening power to bring together the 8 Arctic states, Indigenous peoples, and non-Arctic states to negotiate legally binding international agreements, of course, as others have mentioned, in the areas of scientific cooperation, search and rescue, and oil spill prevention and preparedness. Third, I think Arctic states have also collaborated with non-Arctic. Margretha also mentioned the important agreement to prevent unregulated high seas fisheries in the Central Arctic Ocean, so I won't delve any further into that. But I'd also say that importantly, the very robust science work that the Council has conducted and assembled has really influenced national policies in the Arctic and non-Arctic countries alike. Canada has most certainly benefited from these science contributions to our own climate policy, engagement with Indigenous peoples, and strengthening our own action in the area of black carbon mitigation and many other areas. All of these efforts in their own right really has strengthened the broader constellation of Arctic governance, and they've also complemented the well-established rules-based order already in place, including the law of the sea and other international mechanisms and treaties. I would only mention, and maybe Romain, you can comment. I also think that the role that the Council has played as a convener and fostering scientific research in other communities has also supported the important forums, the growth and of important forums like Arctic Futures, Arctic Frontiers, etc. In terms of how Canada's position in Arctic governments has changed since the creation of the Council, I'd say that over the past 25 years, Canada's position on Arctic governance has really been rooted in our long-standing and steadfast commitment to international cooperation with Arctic and non-Arctic partners in governing areas of shared interest in addressing Arctic challenges. it hasn't changed over this period is the fact that Canada is first and foremost informed and responding to Canadian domestic priorities and needs. Once it's remembered that 40% of Canada is considered Arctic and North, it's an easy step to understand why governments and public servants from federal, territorial governments, Aboriginal, and other forms of government pay particular attention to government management, governance matters through that particular lens. Importantly, our own Arctic and Northern policy engaged all of those partners in building toward a co-developed framework. And we bring that focus forward in the Arctic institutions that we work within. In particular, we work to be a champion of promoting the importance of human dimensions of the work of the Council, putting the focus on the well-being of Northern peoples and communities through sustainable economic, social, and cultural development that benefits all of those who live in the region. In that regard, of course, we look forward to the establishment of a permanent secretariat on the Sustainable Development Working Group. So I think that, I hope, frames a little bit where we've seen the evolution of governance and where Canada continues to put its own efforts as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi, for such a comprehensive answer to this question. Let's turn now to the United States. Lewis, same question to you. How do you think, how would you describe the evolution of Arctic governance from a US perspective over these past 25 years?
Good morning, Romain, and good morning, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be able to join you from Washington. The dangers of speaking last in a format like this is that you have very little original to add, but I think that is a good example of how much room there is for cooperation in the Arctic Council, the many issues that we agree on. We certainly value our strong international cooperation through the Arctic Council. We believe it's helped us keep the region peaceful while increasing environmental protection, promoting sustainable development, encouraging scientific research, and supporting Indigenous peoples throughout the region. The entire Arctic region benefits from our cooperation that is facilitated through the Arctic Council. It allows us to collectively address and overcome challenges in the region, environmental, social, economic, and political, by identifying areas in which we can make demonstrable progress and demonstrating unity of purpose through our words and our actions. In the 25-year history of the Arctic Council, we've seen the Arctic Council subsidiary bodies, the Council itself, grow, develop, and mature. The work has increased, and we've seen these bodies and their capacity increase to meet it. I'd like to note, as my colleagues have noted, the importance of the Arctic Council Strategic Plan, which I think will be a critical document helping us move forward to make sure that as the risks that come with increased human activity in the region multiply, we are able to multiply and perhaps also to rationalize the efforts of our subsidiary bodies, our Secretariat, and the Council itself to meet these challenges. Following the very successful meeting in Salahard that Ambassador Winkler mentioned, I think we all have a lot of optimism that we will be able to meet these challenges and be able to deliver on the rather ambitious agenda set for us by the Reykjavik Declaration. I think that one of the ways that the Council has demonstrated its flexibility and its ability to treat evolving issues that face the region. Some clear examples can be brought from the recent Icelandic chairmanship. The way they dealt with issues of marine litter and plastics in the Arctic Council context, and how they advanced the work that had been started in previous chairmanships on important issues like gender equality in the Arctic. We were pleased to participate in both, and we'll be pleased to participate even more in both of these issues in the future. So as not to repeat more what's been previously said, I'll return the floor to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Lewis. And so I think this leads us quite nicely to the second half of our panel. As we've just learned, the web of relationships which forms Arctic governance, a relationship between states, non-state actors, regional and non-regional partners with the Arctic Council in the middle, has definitely and categorically evolved since the early and mid-1990s. And certainly at the beginning, Arctic cooperation and stability could not be taken for granted. It required, and I think most of our panelists will agree, still requires constant practice through pan-Arctic, multilateral and bilateral collaborations to make the Arctic a just, peaceful and sustainable place, a place of low tensions, high cooperation. And so with this in mind, I've asked each speaker to reflect again and to share their views on current and future challenges in Arctic governance from their own perspective. So, Thomas, what are the current and future challenges of Arctic governance in your view?
Well, thank you. It could be a long list. I would start somewhere else because I forgot to answer the second part of your first question on what has changed in our view, in the Danish view on Arctic governance. And perhaps the very short answer is that very little has changed. We have always believed in the Arctic Council as the key body of cooperation in the Arctic, and we still strongly do so. What perhaps has changed is, in fact, the world around us. I mean, I was there when we did Ilulissat back in 2008, and yes, there was some international interest that we were also reacting to, but this was completely different from the interest that you feel today as a diplomat dealing with the Arctic. So I would say our approach to governance in the Arctic has not changed, but the Arctic has changed and the world has changed, and that of course also, as all civil servants know, has led to a change in the internal political attention on the Arctic, including here in Copenhagen. So that is more a change internally than in our view on governance on the Arctic. As to the challenges we are facing and will be facing, I mean, I made a short list. I'm sure there's a longer list. I think, as many has already mentioned, I actually think inclusion is one of the challenges that we are facing. Inclusion of the people of the Arctic, including the indigenous peoples, as many has also mentioned. I think we are doing okay on this, but more could be done. But I think also inclusion of the rest of the world in the work of the Arctic Council. Margretha mentioned the observers. There's more attention now on the observers, which I think is a right thing. You can also read it both directly and between the lines in the Reykjavik Declaration, and of course from a Danish perspective, we welcome anybody who wants to contribute positively to the development in the Arctic. But I think we should also note, and that will be a subject, I believe, for discussion in the future, that it's not a free ride to be an observer in the Arctic Council. You should also contribute where you can in the Arctic Council, in the working groups, and so on, but also internationally when there's a need for action on the Arctic, including, for instance, in the IMO. I think another challenge that we are facing and will continue to face is that the Arctic Council should be much better in communicating to the rest of the world what we are doing. I simply don't think we are there. A lot has happened. They're doing a wonderful job on communication in the Arctic Council Secretariat, but I think we should do much more. And perhaps in the same sort of field, perhaps it is time for more joint projects from the Arctic states and the permanent participants to sort of showing the world that we are actually managing the Arctic responsibly together. And then, yes, I was considering whether I should mention it, but now I will do it. We may have at some point to find a way to discuss security issues and military issues in the Arctic. It should be outside the Arctic Council. We don't, I have to be more diplomatic. As a representative of the cooperating Arctic, I don't want these issues in the Arctic Council, but there may be a need for us to find a way of discussing them among us. And I'm quite sure that we will, in the continued spirit of cooperation on all issues important to the Arctic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you for being so diplomatic in your answer. So let's turn to Rebecca now. What are the current and future challenges in Arctic governance, and how does Greenland play a role in solving these challenges?
Thank you. I think I'll sort of start with the latter part of your question. I wanted to make sure I unmuted myself. Haven't learned yet. So obviously Greenland plays a key role, and that sort of feeds into that question on how Greenland's position has changed over the course of the life of the Arctic Council, you can say. Greenland is in many ways unique, and I would argue that Greenland has grown to have a special standing in a way. As the Arctic is changing and the international attention has turned to the Arctic, it's no secret that Greenland, centrally located in the Arctic, with 100% of our territory being Arctic, has become both the subject of the many new and radical changes and challenges we are seeing in the region, and also the object of increased attention. This is, of course, due to our geopolitical position, our industrial potential, rare earth elements being one, and as the host of international scientists of numerous disciplines, not least climate change science that goes on in Greenland on the Greenland ice sheet. So Greenland is basically, as we like to say, the Arctic. And consequently, our position in Arctic governance has increased and is increasing. And from our perspective, rightly so. We live in the Arctic, and decisions and agreements influence us and affect us. It affects our environment, our communities, and our daily lives. So the attention that we've been seeing for Greenland is very welcomed. But of course, it's essential for us, as it is for the Arctic communities in general, I know, to ensure that we have influence, that we're involved, and that our interests are safeguarded in Arctic policymaking, as well as on the broader international stage. So we are being situated where we are very aware of our responsibility to secure sustainable development to the benefit of our country, and not least our people, through good governance and through good Arctic governance. And we have this saying, being nothing about us without us. And so when we talk of Greenland's position in the Arctic, it's a developing relationship, and we have good cooperation with Denmark on the matter within the kingdom. The most recent being the Act of Greenland's self-government, where the evolving relationship is framed and described, including through a chapter on foreign affairs and a chapter on the access to independence. So in line with the 2009 Act, Greenland has a voice internationally and in the Arctic, including with own representations abroad, and the competence to negotiate and conclude agreements under international law with foreign states and international organizations, where we have, which exclusively concern Greenland and entirely relate to fields of responsibility that are taken over by the government. So as I mentioned before, Arctic Council for us is the main international governance forum when we talk governance in the Arctic, and we see an only increasing role for ourselves in the future in that forum. And the focus and activity that we will have, which also ties into the challenge, and I very much agree with what Thomas said on inclusivity, the greater effort we will put into securing that the Arctic population is at the center of the work that the Council does. We're doing it to a large extent now, and we're successful for that reason, I find. But there could be more, both when it comes to observers and utilizing them and getting them engaged more in the working groups, both in terms of their capacities, the strengths that they have, and also on financing projects in the working groups. I might leave it at that. I realize I've talked for quite a bit, but just to briefly summarize on current and future challenges, the rapid changes and the interest, as Lou also mentioned, in the Arctic, we're seeing more activities take place. And as that happens, we will need to increase our governance and we need to strengthen Arctic Council. And I very much agree with what was said by Lou that, you know, the strategic plan that we agreed on for the next 10 years is a critical document for us to address those challenges going forward and succeed with that. Thanks.
You, Rebecca. Margretha?
Yeah.
The floor is yours now.
Hi. On the question of the Faroe Islands' position in Arctic governance and how it has changed since the creation of the Arctic Council, I'm going to take us a little bit back in history and tell you that as a seafaring nation, the Faroe Islands' active engagement in the Arctic region is long and enduring, and our engagement in the region takes off in the middle of the 19th century when the first fishermen set out for unexplored and distant waters of the high north. And we brag about that not many vessels have been as far as the Faroes, who have sailed the waters nearly close to the edge of the world. The Arctic Council has complemented an already well-established and functional cooperation on governance of fisheries issues, which already took place in regional and international fisheries organizations. And at the same time, we were also busy exerting governance of our ocean and marine resources in bilateral cooperation with neighboring countries and those further afield, with whom we had entered bilateral fisheries agreements. So stewardship of ocean affairs in the wider Arctic region had been established, and the international collaboration on environmental protection had also taken off. But with the Arctic Council, we stepped up the engagement and moved into other fields, environmental protection, research on pollution and climate change, health and safety as well. And by and large, the entrance into the or the engagement with the Arctic Council marked the beginning of greater ambition and commitment to international cooperation, and also sparked a greater consciousness of what could be our role and contribution in regional cooperation going forward. It was indeed a milestone that strengthened our position in Arctic governance as we got a foothold on a platform that enhanced visibility and provided for the opportunities of knowledge sharing with our circumpolar neighbors. And it also gave us the opportunity to make unique contributions on pressing issues such as climate change and pollution of paramount importance to a nation as ours, entirely dependent on the natural resources of the sea. The incentive to take part was very strong, and in 2013 we made the front runner to the process of updating the national strategy, which we are doing for our Arctic commitment, which is what we are in the process of doing today. International cooperation is indeed a priority, but we stress the importance of stronger cooperation in and on the Arctic region. And in the past decade, we have therefore welcomed the increased interest and recognition of the position of the Faroe Islands as partners in the region, both from the EU, with whom we see great possibilities for future collaboration on Arctic issues, such as the blue bioeconomy, and also from the Icelandic government, who, together with the Faroese government, now explore possibilities of further cooperation, in addition to the already established. For instance, by free trade agreements. The US and the Faroe Islands are busy translating the strategic partnership agreement into concrete collaboration on common issues of interest as well. So, but on a finishing note, with regard to our position in the Arctic Council, there is, as much as we depend and benefit from the Arctic Council and appreciate the cooperation, there's no denying that as a long and enduring stakeholder in the Arctic region and with exclusive competence of all subject matters that are dealt with in the Council, we still aspire for the possibility to also in this forum to be able to speak in our own name and along with the states and the PPs. But we say that if governance equals cooperation and being involved in bilateral and multilateral cooperation, definitely the position of the Faroe Islands in Arctic governance has become increasingly more relevant to ourselves and others, and altogether stronger. And just on the issue of current and future challenges, there is no doubt that climate change is above all the single most acute challenge of today. And it is the speed at which fundamental environmental changes take place that should compel us to accelerate action. We also realize that the challenges are multifaceted and interdependent and of global significance, and therefore, as I mentioned before, the issue of inclusion is paramount, and one we should think more of going forward. The Arctic Council is by far, or in many respects, a role model on governance. And from a Faroese perspective, also the Arctic is part and parcel of the ocean system. We depend on all matters oceanic, and therefore this is also a major concern. Finally, in the view of the Faroe Islands, the peoples of the Arctic must continue to be at the center of policy discussions in and about the Arctic. All actors, big and small, should acknowledge the different capacities and different levels of autonomy within the Arctic, as well as the legitimate aspirations of Arctic peoples and nations for greater visibility and involvement in international policy shaping and decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, Margretha. Heidi, now from a Canadian perspective, what are the key issues and challenges that lie ahead for Arctic governance?
Thanks, Romain. I think I can be a little bit briefer because others have mentioned the core response here, but I will mention that as we look to the future, we can certainly see a number of challenges that will demand continued cooperation in the Arctic. The disproportionate impacts of climate change on the Arctic is a leading challenge, with warming occurring as much as 3 times the rate of the global average. I know that we all know that, but that bears repeating for its impact and its effects on the land, biodiversity, cultures, and traditions of those living in the Arctic. At the same time, climate change and technology are making the Arctic more accessible. This equates to rising interest in the prospects for Arctic shipping, tourism, fisheries, and natural resources development. At the same time, there's growing international interest in protecting the fragile Arctic ecosystem from the impacts of climate change. But it also requires that we continue to work both domestically and internationally to find solutions that really safeguard the fragile Arctic ecosystem without with also effectively incorporating the needs and desires of the people who call the region their home. This includes the inclusion of Arctic Indigenous peoples, their knowledge, their language, and their cultures. So many of these issues can be effectively tackled within the Arctic Council, as evidenced by the over 100 projects across 6 working groups of the Council. Of course, some issues fall outside of the Council appropriately and explicitly, as Thomas had mentioned. More broadly, we've referenced earlier the global legal framework and the various agreements amongst and beyond Arctic nations that will play into our work. I think as senior Arctic officials, we must always remain attentive and flexible in terms of the changes required within the Council in order for the Council itself to stay relevant, while also continuously improving the structures and the practices that have served us so well over the past 25 years. I'll close it with that.
Thank you, Heidi. Strengthening the Arctic Council indeed. And Lewis, the final word is for you. From the perspective of the United States, what do you think the key issues or the future challenges of Arctic governance are?
Thank you, Romain. I'd like to start with just a word on how our position in Arctic governance has changed, and I think it's important for answering the second question. Our commitment to Arctic governance has only intensified over the 25 years of the existence of the Arctic Council. I think we are truly blessed to have the active participation of the permanent participants representing the indigenous of the Arctic. A 25-year consistent, constant, deepening dialogue with the permanent participants has shown us just how valuable cooperation is for good governance. We understand they have generations worth of knowledge about how to be good stewards of the Arctic, and we need to be true and equal partners in the work of stewardship. As we pursue economic development, we need to do it in a sustainable and transparent way that directly benefits indigenous communities, and that is one of the core tasks the Council faces. It's clear that the Arctic as a region for strategic competition is something that has seized the world's attention. As Thomas and Heidi both noted, issues of military security are outside of the realm of the Arctic Council, the Arctic Council's remit by means of the Ottawa Declaration. And I think it's healthy that they remain so. We will need to have a holistic approach to Arctic issues. There will be places for these conversations to take place. I think it's quite useful that they don't take place within the Arctic Council. It leaves us room, time, effort, and energy for the host of other challenges that we will face. As to current and future challenges, I think my colleagues summarized them quite well. I think that it's important to note that try as we might, our ability to predict the challenges of the future is far from perfect. And this is exactly why we need to redouble our efforts as instructed by the ministers in the Reykjavik Declaration to make sure that our work in the Arctic Council, including through the Secretariat, through the subsidiary bodies, is effective and efficient and follows our strategic plan. When we do this, we will maximize our ability to have capacity to face challenges that today we can't see. I think we know well that issues related to climate change and the environment are only intensifying. They will bring in additional human activity and additional risks. To be able to answer these challenges, we're going to need to work even smarter in the future than we have in the past. And that's why I think the strategic plan is so important, and our effective implementation of it is one of the most important issues facing the Council itself.
Thank you so much, Lewis. Now we have a bit over 20 minutes for questions. So now opening the floor for questions. If you're attending in person in Brussels, please let someone over there know that you have a question so they can relay it to me. On the other hand, if you're attending online, you can write your question using the Q&A function on Zoom. When asking your question, please let us know which speaker you are asking the question to, if it's all the panelists or just a specific person. Thank you so much. Perhaps in waiting for this, I will use my privilege as moderator to ask the first question. Thomas, you mentioned the Ilulissat Declaration as one of the cornerstone of Arctic governance over the past 25 years. Could you reflect on the declaration itself and what it brought to Arctic governance? Certainly, I think at the time, if I remember correctly, it was a bit controversial to say the least. So could you just reflect on how the Ilulissat Declaration has changed Arctic governance?
I think as Margretha and others said, I mean, the Arctic is governed by international law, the UNCLOS, cooperation, and we state that today as evident. I would say it was not so evident when we started work on the Ilulissat Declaration back in 2000. Oh, I have to put this one down here. It was not so evident when we started back on the Ilulissat Declaration in 2008. I mean, there were questions being asked from around the world, including in the UN, as to what is governing this area. So I actually believe that the most important message sent by Ilulissat in regard to governance was that there are rules applying to the Arctic. Back then, as we still unfortunately see it, there are people out there who compare the Arctic to the Antarctic and the special Antarctic treaty. And the message we sent in Ilulissat in 2008, repeated it in 2018 and keep repeating is no, you cannot compare the Arctic to the Antarctic. There is sufficient governance already in place in the Arctic. And of course, the other important message was that the states in the Arctic will abide by this. And I think what we have seen since then, with, for instance, the agreement between Russia and Norway on the Barents Sea, the work and continuous dialogue taking place on the continental shelf in the Arctic Ocean, and so on and so forth, are examples or are specifications that the states are living up to what we committed ourselves to in Ilulissat in 2008. But there was at that time an importance of sending this message to the rest of the world, and that I will maintain is still the important part of Ilulissat 2008. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I don't see any questions coming through. So either this might be a very short discussion panel, or we'll have to come up with a lot of questions myself. But I mean, I'm happy to do this as well. Oh, there we have one. So there's a question for all the panelists about the region status. And as we know, there are many zones in the world that can be considered as conflict zones. And there's disagreements between countries in the Arctic Council about other parts in the world. My question is that although there are other problems, do they think, or do the panelists, I guess, think that there is an Arctic exceptionalism which puts the Arctic in a different position? That's Arctic exceptionalism. Does anyone in the panel want to answer this one?
Well, I'm always happy to speak if nobody else wants to speak.
Go ahead, Thomas, please.
I would be perhaps a bit careful to say exceptionalism. Of course, the Arctic is influenced by geopolitical developments like other regions of the world, and this is what we have seen quite clearly in recent years. What is exceptional, at least in the Arctic, is that we are still cooperating. And we will continue to cooperate. All eight states and permanent participants. So there is an element of exceptionalism in the Arctic. But to sort of pretend that we can just sit back and ignore what's going on in the rest of the world, that would be too naive. Our job, I believe, as Arctic diplomats, if there is such an expression, is to work through it and around it, and make sure that we continue to cooperate on issues in the Arctic where we have a clear common interest in cooperating. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Does anyone else want to react to this? Lewis, I see that you unmuted yourself. Yes.
Yes, I just want to echo what Thomas said. I think that exceptionally strong cooperation is certainly a fine characterization for the 25 plus years of history of the Arctic Council. I think calling the Arctic a zone of conflict or a conflict area might be a little strong. It certainly is an area of strategic competition, but more importantly, it's where the people of our 8 states live, and it's the home of the permanent participants as part of that as well. And that's why the holistic approach that our Arctic Council cooperation offers will be important in the future of governance in the region.
Thank you, Luis. We have another question for Margretha and maybe for Rebecca as well. So Margretha, you said that all participants of Arctic governance need to acknowledge the differences in capacity and level of autonomy between different Arctic nations and peoples. What does that mean for you in practice?
In practice, it means that we recognize the right of all the relevant stakeholders to be a part of the discussion and dialogue on how we organize ourselves in the Arctic region, and that we appreciate and welcome the contribution of the people who live in the Arctic region, but also recognize the contribution of those outside of the particular region who are influenced by what happens in the Arctic region and at large.
Thank you, Margretha. Rebecca, do you want to chip in this?
I think it was very well put. I think that's the gist of it. Just to follow up maybe on Thomas's point when we talked about Antarctica as well, main difference, of course, as we've said a couple of times, is that people live in the Arctic. And this might sound as a logical statement to make, but the situation still is that many don't know this. I meet people wherever I go who's surprised, you know, that Greenland is inhabited, which surprisingly enough, or the composition of Greenland, you know, that it's an Inuit culture and so forth. So I think there's a long way to go on communication still, and get the word out there on what the Arctic is and what it isn't, and how development and how strong a cooperation we do have already with that. As Margretha spoke to, there is room for improvement in terms of inclusivity, and we've touched upon this already, and I'll sound like a broken record, but it definitely is one of the challenges, but it's also one of the successes already of the Arctic Council. So going forward, doing more of that and inviting in also other stakeholders, because they do play an important role in the Arctic as well. But again, that the development that we are going to see in the Arctic cannot, in our perspective, not be sustainable if it does not accommodate the needs of the peoples in the Arctic. So again, we who call the Arctic home must lead the dialogue on the development of our region. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Rebecca. I see that someone in Brussels might have a question. Is there a question in Brussels?
You hear me okay?
Yes, we can, yes.
Perfect. My name is Alpha Amlo. I'm a French postgraduate student, and my question is as follows. How do you see, well, actually, during the Arctic Circle Assembly of this year, we have seen the Munich Security Conference. We have seen Munich Security Conference representatives coming onto the assembly to discuss about security issues in the Arctic. And my question is as follows: how do you see the Munich Security Conference being a potential forum for discussing Arctic security issues in the future?
Thank you so much. Lou?
I think it certainly is one model. I think meetings such as this, or the Arctic Circle Assembly, or others as well, I won't presume to say where these discussions should take place. I think it's good for the Arctic states and other interested parties to have places where these conversations can take place. And it's particularly these assemblies that have a broad participation to include governments, business, NGOs, the academic world, I think they are uniquely placed to have a broad-based discussion on important issues like this.
Thank you, Louis. Does anyone else want to follow up on this? No? Okay. I have another question here. So one for Thomas. Thomas, you mentioned the Reykjavik Minister Declaration from earlier this year as another cornerstone of Arctic governance. What, in your opinion, made that particular minister successful so that a long-term strategy could be decided? And did Iceland, as a chair, had or played a substantial part in this? I mean, maybe the last question you can't really answer because you're not an Icelandic representative, Thomas. But yes, the floor is yours.
I'm sure on the last question I can say the same as an Icelandic representative would say, that the Icelandic chairmanship did play a very important role in the success of the Reykjavik ministerial, and especially in the preparations. I mean, many have heard it before, but we spent hours and days in front of our screens negotiating both the declaration and the strategy, and the Icelandic chairmanship, in my view, did it in exactly the right way, and that was part of the reason why we succeeded. But I think another very, very important part was that we all wanted to succeed. And let's again be diplomatic. There was a history before that, reaching back to Rovaniemi in May 2019, and the situation had changed, and we were all sitting in April of this year with a very, very and you could feel it through the screen, to use that stupid expression, but you could really feel that everybody wanted this to succeed. All the participants wanted the Reykjavik ministerial to be ambitious, to point clearly on the way ahead for the Arctic Council, and that's why we did it. Thank you.
Thomas. Louis, do you want to react to this?
Yeah, just listening to Thomas, I think it points to something really important, and that is people often talk about whether agreements are legally binding. When honest aspirations are met with ambition and sincerity, and results are achieved, that is the goal that we need. We're currently working in the Arctic Council through the expert group on black carbon and methane on methane reductions. These are voluntary aspirational goals, but they're voluntary aspirational goals that we have elected to meet. We're working hard to meet them, and we're on track to meet them. So sometimes we can focus too much on the form and not enough on the practical results. And I think when we have the ambition and the desire to meet those ambitions, the results can be more than the positive ones that we see.
Thank you, Louis. Does anyone, Heidi, Margretha, Rebecca, do you want to follow up on this? No.
I just want to say that Louis summed it up very, very well. It could be a good finishing note.
Thank you, Margretha. So one last question, and then I think we'll wrap it up. We've got a question. I think it's to all panelists. How do you see addressing the Arctic climate change paradox? Should countries, as the EU new Arctic policy calls for, stop new exploration and exploitation of fossil fuels in the region as part of showing Arctic global climate leadership? And that's a tough one if we want to stay diplomatic, I guess. But yes, does anyone want to tackle this one? Rebecca, yes.
I can diplomatically focus on our own side of the booth and talk a little bit about Greenland and this aspect. Climate change is, as Heidi mentioned, is drastic, 3 times as fast happening in the Arctic than anywhere else, and in Greenland is having a real consequence for the livelihoods and the everyday lives of Kalaallit in Greenland. The government, our government of Greenland, has a wish to show leadership, even though the emissions in Greenland obviously are very, very little when you look at world emissions. But we came to Paris, COP26, with a strong message of green transition in Greenland to show that the face of climate change is also on the global push and how we need to follow up on the Paris Agreement and really deliver. So hopefully that was a message that can inspire. There's a stop to oil and gas now in Greenland. It was just confirmed in Parliament. And there's a real potential to talk in positives, to develop industry we need rare earth elements for the green transition. And what we're hoping in Greenland is to see investments for these rare earth elements that we do have in Greenland to help the green transition globally. So with that, and with the hydropower and potential for hydrogen and power to X, there are so many advantages in the Arctic to make the green transition happen there as well.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thomas, yes?
No, I would just add, and I know the next panel will do it even stronger. I think it's a great pity if the EU's policy towards the Arctic is boiled down to one point, which is this on carbon extraction. It is so much more. So please listen when Mr. Mann comes on at the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Good advertisement for people to keep following the Arctic Treaty Symposium. Does any of the speaker want to react to this question we had, or are you happy with me wrapping it up? Or is there a question in Brussels?
It's Romain, I'll leave the work of the next panel ahead of them, but I do want to say that I am. It's worth taking a little visual across the work of the Arctic Council and its 6 working groups to just realize the extent to which climate mitigation and adaptation really is mainstreamed across the working groups. And I just really want to enunciate. Lou has already put an accent on the important work of the expert group on black carbon and methane, which is importantly placed within the council with a mandate in behind it. So I just really wanted to re-register those points.
Thank you, Heidi. Any final word before I wrap this panel up? No. All right, thank you so much, everybody, for attending this second panel on revisiting Arctic governance as part of the Arctic Treaty Symposium. Thank you so much to our 5 wonderful speakers today, and we look forward to more discussions and to more presentations later today and tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Romain, in name of Brussels, I would like to join you to thank the panelists. I thank you as well as the moderator of this panel discussion. Before we move on to the third, last but not least, panel discussion on the matter of governance in the Arctic, we have to reset a bit here the floor. We have to add a few tables. So I invite you for another coffee. You might not sleep anymore tonight, but later tonight there will be some beer and wine if you want. So we reconvene in about let's say about 5:10, if that's okay with everyone. Thank you.